indeed. I know most, but not all of you. My name's Tom. I'm the founder and chief exec of Street Child. Big thanks to Goldman Sachs for hosting us. Dom, one of our trustees, works this little finance business. He's around, so thanks to Dom for organising us to be here. I've got four of my senior colleagues here we've been together all week, planning the year really. Many of you know, this is this week is what we do, we're delighted just to have this opportunity to come together and share a bit of what Street Child's been up to in 2024, a bit of what Street Child's going to get up to in 2025, and I'm just going to kind of curate an informal chat here, and then there'll be some space for Q&A, and then the bar will be open afterwards, and we can mix and mingle some more. But I know it's early in the year, so I'm always grateful for everyone that comes out this evening and everyone who supports Street Child, makes everything we do possible, because Street Child is a community of the willing. We just wrapped up our meeting earlier by thanking the staff I gathered in the room, because last year we made a material impact on the lives of 500,000 children, and that's really something that only happens because everyone comes together and does it. I'm going to go. I know that none of them want to start with them, so it's not easy. So whoever I start with is going to grumble to me, but I think I can take it from Tyler. Most of Tyler, I'm going to start with you. But all four of you, I'm going to ask you just to talk to me about one highlight of 2024, and we'll go from there. Why don't you use that one?
Check it's working.
Hello. I'll speak loudly and see if that works as well, but good. Good, well, hey, thank you Tom, for letting me go first, I appreciate that. And thanks everyone for being here. I really enjoy the opportunity to speak with supporters, but also very much our staff here in London. It's not often that we get such a good gathering, not only of, again, supporters, but also our staff who are the engine behind all the work that we are fortunate enough to be able to do. If I'm looking back on 2024, I think one of the culminating moments for me was around our work in and around the UN General Assembly in New York. And maybe that's not sort of a typical place to start with in these conversations, but I think it shows the growth of Street Child, that we're able to command some very interesting spaces in New York. And just to give a quick rundown of what that looked like, Tom and I started one day. I'm going to forget the order of the events, but let me make up a day for you. We started at 7 a.m. with a meeting of the High-Level Steering Group for Education Cannot Wait, which is the UN Fund for Education in Emergencies. So Tom sat at the table across from Gordon Brown. He sat next to the leaders of UNICEF, UNESCO, WFP, and other quite important bodies in the UN and the civil society sectors. He also sat next to ministers from very important bilateral donors in the education and emergency space. And he was able to speak to the priorities of the international civil society space very, very broadly, right? So the point being, Tom represented Save the Children, Tom represented Plan, Tom represented all of these massive INGOs wearing a Street Child hat, right? Which I think was quite an impressive thing to be able to watching from behind the back row, seeing Tom speaking across to Gordon Brown and all of these other influential people. And we also then convened an event where we brought together these INGOs that we're fortunate enough to be able to convene as part of the constituency for Education Cannot Wait. So we had, Alice may be able to give me better numbers, but we had a good 30 people in the room from a huge number of international NGOs who were there to talk about how we as a community, so beyond impacting 500,000 children directly, how we could catalyze our influence as a sector for children in a much, much bigger way. And again, seated at the front of that was Street Child, right? Street Child was convening this group of international actors, and again, I think it's such a massive demonstration of growth for an organization of this size. So I think I'll stop there with those two events. That's a big highlight for me, and again, I think it's really a demonstration of being able to go beyond that direct program implementation and have a much broader influence for children who need our support the most.
Yeah, Tyler, thank you very much. I do think it's a cool place to start, and yeah, when we're sort of sitting there in that meeting, well, whenever we have these moments, I do always think back to I know a number of you. I think I counted like 10 or so folk who've been to McKinney for the marathon. But yeah, I do think back to when Street Child started, and we used to conduct our meetings, like the whole of Street Child was set, in sort of like 10 of us little sort of hut in McKinney, and then when you sit in these things, so it's a good indication of how we've come. And one of the themes that we've been working on in our discussions this week as a senior team has been, we want to continue to sharpen our delivery and directly support more children to go to school, but we know we have a voice, we have a special some place in the ecosystem. People recognise that Street Child, and again, Tyler might want to come in here. Tyler's previous role working for Education Can't Wait and various other actors in the UN related system, but our work supporting local organisations, delivering almost all of our work through local organisations, I think is the thing that's really made Street Child sort of stand out and kind of fast track our kind of status a little bit. It's cool.
Yeah, no, just briefly, I think at this event last year, I spoke to the fact that when I spoke to Tom about joining Street Child, it was because of this focus on local actors. And now there is that ability that is played out on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis through bodies like the high-level steering group of ECW, where we're actually able to advocate on their behalf and in a functional way, working with the largest funder of education and emergencies to actually help them to adapt their programming so that more programming is delivered through those local actors that we think we know how to work with well. So I think it speaks to sort of the history of Street Child that started with a local organization in Sierra Leone and is now at the point of being able to advocate at a much higher level that more programming is delivered through the people who know what their children need the best.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, Remy.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, mine segues well from Tyler. But certainly I think for me the highlight of 2024 was to see that obviously everyone who knows Street Child well, as Tyler talked about, knows how localization is very much at the heart of all of what we do. And we have specifically since 2019 embarked on a number of partnerships with the Global Education Cluster, the Child Protection Area of Responsibility, Education Cannot Wait, to look at programs that really look at enhancing and empowering the role that local actors have in humanitarian response. The culmination of a lot of those initiatives arrived around 2023 when we started our first ever partnership with USAID on a very ambitious $3 million program to work across 35 countries to support local actors across all of these countries, some of which we don't in fact have our own presence or operations in. But in recognition of the work that we've done with local partners where we do work, we were invited to expand the scope and scale. In the last year alone, we've supported 51 funding proposals, many of which have been successful for those organizations. We've supported directly 193 organizations with very intensive capacity strengthening support. And our network of local organizations that we work with at the moment stands at about 565 at the last count, which is tremendous when we think about what we as a mid-sized organization are able to achieve in terms of total impact, both in terms of the work we can do in partnership with those local organizations, as well as Tyler said, by advocating for their enhanced and amplified role across the sector as a whole. One of the key aspects of what we do with our local partners and what personally continues to attract me to Street Child's approach to localization is that we support them to directly raise their own funds. And we do this in a way where we don't only train them on how to write a great law frame or train them on how to design a great program. We sit there and say to them, not too long ago, we were as small as you, right? Not too long ago, we didn't have any brand recognition either, right? Save the Children might be able to raise money because most people know who they are and what they do and how well they do it. But we've had to work really hard to prove to our funders why they should be funding us and why we are their best vehicle to achieve impact for children. And so essentially what we do is we stand up and give away a lot of our secrets to these organizations. And each and every time we've heard tremendous appreciation from organizations for our ability to speak their language to them, right? And to really look at how they can leverage their positions as smaller, more specific, community-oriented actors to still have an absolutely outsized impact. And my highlight, the absolute highlight of 2024 was going to Uganda in November and meeting one of our partners, Yared. I last met Yared in 2019 on my previous trip to Uganda pre-COVID days. And Yared was in a tiny office, had a team of maybe 10 people at the core, and was still doing extremely excellent work. They are a refugee-led and refugee-run organization. But this time, 5 years later, almost to the day, Yared had an office that was much bigger than ours. Their budget is much larger than ours. They have far more staff than we do in Uganda, and that is exactly how it should be, right? And the absolute tremendous joy of seeing this organization that we've had the privilege of holding hands with all these years, seeing them commandeer the humanitarian space in Uganda, have a voice, be able to shape the response for refugees, using their own personal experiences and their expertise from working in their communities all these days was absolutely incredible. So, looking forward to more.
Judy, you're better holding the microphone, so you're going to highlight in 2024.
So it's like passing the baton, isn't it?
And parcel.
I've actually had an extraordinary year last year. I'm very privileged to be able to go out and sit with projects, work with projects in Somalia and Somaliland. And last year we had the opportunity to deliver a project to over 21,000 children, focusing on basic education, Somali language skills, basic numeracy skills, and being able to give children, particularly children in IDP settings, these are displaced children who have been constantly moved because of conflict, because of flooding and other crisis, the chance to actually learn to read, write and do mathematics. So we developed this education program called Teaching at the Right Level, which takes children and groups them by learning ability rather than by age or number of years in education, and enables them to gain those very basic foundational skills. The real joy that I had was being able to visit one of our projects up in Somaliland, in Hargeisa, going to one of the project schools, meeting with the children, meeting with the teachers, and the enthusiasm that the teachers have, because normally they would, I'm sure you all know, stand at the front of the class, write on the blackboard, and the children have to learn it by rote. No, these were children doing word games, doing number games, throwing balls around with numbers on, having little slips of paper where they had to put the right number in the right pocket in an apron that the teacher was wearing. And the absolute enthusiasm of the teachers for that whole way of working with children, which was totally different to how they've worked before, was really outstanding. And bear in mind, these children, they'd been in education, these were grade 3 children, they'd been in education for 3 years, full time. And when we did the baseline survey, a third of them could not recognise a letter and could not recognise a number after 3 years in education. But at the end of the project, that's after just 5 months, less than 1% of them was still at that level. And over 80% of them were at story level. They could read a story, or they could do simple division or multiplication. So the impact of that programme was very pleasing. And the result of that is the Somaliland government are keen to now roll this out in all of their schools, and unusually have said, we're actually prepared to commit money to this. I mean, this is a very fragile education system that's very underfunded, but they've seen such an impact of the programme that they now want to actually commit to doing that for all of their children. So yeah, 2024 is really a good year. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think I have to take us back to our Street Child Heartlands and talk a bit about some of our deepest rooted and longest standing work in West Africa as my highlight for last year. I wouldn't claim too much credit for it because I was coming back from maternity leave, and the credit very much goes to the Sierra Leone team and Lindsay, who is not up on stage but has been, you know, the absolute champion of the Education for Every Child Today program, the EFFECT program, which aims to get 100,000 out of school children across Sierra Leone, Liberia and northeast Nigeria, which is conflict affected, into school over 4 years. So we're at the halfway point of the programme. We're actually now past it, but last year we were at the halfway point. And at the halfway point, we're really starting to see what has this programme achieved. It's no longer an ambition like, wow, we've got to get 100,000 children into school. We're able to look at some real retention data. And to know that after 2 years, 97% of the children we enrolled in year 1 had re-enrolled in year 2, children that had previously been entirely out of school, out of school for a year or more, due to lack of access to a school. So the fact that we had built a school or rehabilitated a school meant that they could now go, or due to the lack of funding within the family for their education. So the family business grant that we were able to support their caregiver with meant that actually, some for the first time, or those who had dropped out due to lack of funds in the family, could actually go back to their education. So, for more than, and this is 50,000 children, more than 50,000 children that we've now enrolled on this program, to see a 97% retention rate is, super exciting. In some contexts that are pretty renowned for being very, very difficult to work in, and are, it's really difficult to work with communities across conflict-affected Nigeria and say, you need to send your children to school. This is their future. They want to go to school, and to advocate with those families to allocate resources to education. But this has been a joint effort amongst local partners that we've worked with, in Sierra Leone and Liberia now for more than 10 years. Relationships of trust. It's a real collaborative effort. Everyone coming together to really get children into school, and this has been a massive collaborative effort, not just in West Africa, but pretty much everyone here in this room, I imagine, in some way, direct or indirect, has contributed to EFFECT, because the core funder for the EFFECT programme is Educate a Child Initiative, but they funded 50% because they like to catalyse further funding, and so it's been an enormous fundraising effort that's gone into the EFFECT programme. And would we really have thought we could do it? I'm looking at Lucinda, we're really on track to raise the money. $6 million we've had to raise, which is, for a charity of Street Child size, no short order, but it's been possible with, the effort of everybody in this room. So I have to, shout out to that one as my highlight of 2024.
Yeah, no, that's great. It has been a biggie, and there were, I don't want to embarrass people, there are 2 or 3 people in this room who have made particular contributions to us getting towards that target in different ways. So, very many thanks, but many hands make the work. Take us to the most kind of surprising place that we find Street Child, which is sadly in Eastern Europe again. If we'd been sitting here 3 years ago, the idea that Street Child would have programs in Eastern Europe, I would have just assumed that someone had sort of taken a knock to the head or been a typo or whatever, but actually Our work in Ukraine was by funding volume our largest program last year, mainly to 2 different grants from the United Nations, but not exclusively. And then next door in Moldova, and Tyler's been working very closely with Sasha, who's our Ukraine worker, and we're just going to invite Tyler to share a few words on working with Sasha and the team, and then I'm going to pass to Ramya to talk about the very interesting work that we've been doing in Moldova that she's been looking after.
Rami and I were just guessing when you said Eastern Europe, whether it was Ukraine and me or Moldova and Rami, but he got us both. Yeah, look, I think obviously looking at the back of my boss's head was a highlight of 2024, but working with the people that are doing the work at country level is the day-to-day highlight for sure, and Sasha to me stands out as representative of all that is good in this organization. The program in Ukraine is obviously a strong one, and it's strong for reasons that we understand. There's a lot of attention on Ukraine. There's a pretty good pipeline of funding in Ukraine, and that's a positive thing. So I want to focus not necessarily on sort of the breadth of the programming, which is impressive, but on the relationships that have been built because of the programming. So year over year, Sasha and his team have been able to integrate themselves in the education cluster in Ukraine. And the cluster, for those of you who don't know, is a UN coordination mechanism set up to coordinate response in education. So this grouping is responsible for sharing with the world what the needs are in the sector more broadly. They also are highly influential in speaking with donors about which organizations are prepared to deliver which type of programming in response to that need. Year over year, Sasha and his team, with huge support from Rania and the advisory team, have been able to win Ukraine humanitarian response funds, right, and been able to continuously roll that over from year to year. So these are funds that are in country, UN funds that they're able to again kind of sustain programming with again and again. And the fact that they're winning these grants alongside much larger, much older organizations, I think is quite impressive. At the same time, we have a very interesting project with Infosys, right? And I think this shows the breadth of the type of programming that Street Child is able to deliver. And this program is meant to deliver digital learning centers for children along the front line of the conflict. And so providing additional learning opportunities for those who have their education interrupted, who need to catch up, and also for teachers to go in and to have in-service training as well. And we're using a very innovative platform developed by Infosys, and delivering that in how many different? Seven different locations across the contact line. Now, that's very exciting, of course, for children and for teachers, but I think what's equally exciting is that through this work, Sasha and his team have worked very closely with the Ministry of Education to design the content that is in this platform. And because of that, there is now this established relationship with the ministry where they're asking more and more of Street Child and helping us to find more and more partners to deliver with. At the same time, Sasha and his team have worked very closely with a huge breadth of local actors. And through this program, they're also identifying those who are able to pick up other parts of these new additional programs so that it's a progressive approach, building relationships, building capacity, both with ministry and with local actors, and starting to combine those powers in the service of funding that comes both from the corporate side and from the UN multilateral side. We'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Tyler. So just jumping straight over the border, we entered Moldova, I think, initially off the back of the Ukraine response, really looking at, of course, we wanted to support populations who were affected by the conflict in Ukraine, but also to look at Ukrainian refugee movement and see how we could be supporting and contributing to their reintegration or resettlement wherever they were going. We did actually scope a number of different countries around Ukraine, but we settled on Moldova because Moldova was one, the poorest of the countries that Ukrainian refugees were fleeing to, but two, was also the country where the poorest refugees were remaining because they didn't have the means to go on into other, perhaps more desirable parts of Western Europe. And so the combination of these two phenomena, you have a very under-resourced, already underfunded government, and then you have tremendous refugee movement with the least resourced refugees coming in and staying in country. Picking off the theme of what Tyler talked about in terms of our strengthening relationship with the Ministry of Education in Ukraine, we went directly to the ministries in Moldova saying, how can we help you? And what we heard was really interesting, because they were saying to us, we have a number of partners, UNICEF and other big multilaterals and bilaterals, who are supporting us with primary education. What we actually need support on is early education and in particular childcare. And this comes off the unique phenomenon of the fact that most refugees who are coming over the border are in fact coming without the men in their families because they are of course required to remain in Ukraine. So you have mothers coming over the border, often with multiple children, but who aren't able to be employed or look for means to sustain themselves because of their childcare duties and their childcare responsibilities. And the government was searching for a solution to this problem, and they asked if we would be willing to support them to find one of those solutions. So in typical street child style, we said, what can we do here? And how can we pull together every resource we can find in order to attempt to find a solution to this problem? We brought in some catalytic funding from the UBS Optimus Foundation, who are one of our long-term partners. We also then sat down with the ministry and brought together a national steering committee of all of the bilateral and multilaterals in country. That included UN Women, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNDP, GIZ. The Ministry of Labor and Social Protection was leading the charge, but we brought in the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance. And I want to highlight one thing here that the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection in Moldova often says. He says, I have a childcare theory of everything, right? Childcare is at the heart of a country's development because it's about protection of our most young and vulnerable children. It's about early intervention if those children have disabilities, for example, that need early recognition and remediation. It is, of course, about early education, but it is also about women's economic empowerment and their employability. It is also about gender equality and giving women equal rights, not just in society and in the workplace, but also in the home. It is also about the country's demography, right? You see a country like Moldova that has huge outward migration, needs more young people to come in and take up roles in its labor force. So the work we were doing from very early on was really positioned as something that could hugely transform a small country like Moldova. To cut a very, very long story short, we helped the ministry design the National Program of Action for Childcare from 2023 to 2026. We spent the entirety of 2023 helping them write policy and legislation and to pass laws that allowed them to rapidly expand early education and childcare across the country through 4 primary means. Expanding public childcare centers, for the first time ever in Moldova, allowing home-based care to start up, opening the first ever employer-based creches. So Orange Telecom in Moldova today, if you walk in, has a creche that allows women to come to work with their children, drop them off at the door and pick them up on their way out and check in on them throughout the day, which is very important culturally speaking as well. And we're about to open our second employer creche at the State University. The most critical aspect of this program has been that with the 1.5 million odd euros that we leveraged from our relationship with the UBS Optimus Foundation, we were able to use that to bring in over 10 million euros of money from within the government's central budget, a huge, very generous grant from the government of Romania, thanks to a lot of advocacy and some excellent propositioning, the other multilateral and bilateral funders in country, and most recently, and perhaps most significantly, by getting the GPE fund for Moldova that typically would focus on primary. It's a $30 million fund, but we were able to influence the securing of $5 million of that $30 million towards childcare. Childcare is now a critical component in Moldova's EU growth plan, as Moldova is now signed up to accede to the EU. And as part of that growth plan has a commitment to create an additional 5,000 places for childcare. This has all been achieved with $1.5 million, a tremendous sense of possibility from the organization, and 2 staff members on the ground. I think there's that phrase about a mosquito in a closed room and the impact that it can have. And I think our multiple example is perhaps one of multiple examples across Street Child that a small group of extremely committed people with a huge sense of possibility can literally transform countries. And so, yeah, that's where we're at in Eastern Europe, but it is certainly, I think, a rich example of where we've learned so much and we've got so many lessons about what we can do, what we could make possible, that we'll be certainly carrying forward into the other more complex contexts that we work in across the world as well. And we're very excited to see where we can go with that. And I'm personally very excited to see where we can go further downstream, supporting not just primary age children, but also children through early education and getting them into school earlier and ensuring that their family environments are therefore that much more supportive because their mothers and fathers too therefore are more empowered.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. I think the mosquito analogy is a bit close to home. Various people with Street Child has organised that mosquito experience for. But it had resonance. As an example of our ability to work with government, leverage, and who knows where that journey in early childhood could take the organisation. It's a fascinating program, and thanks for the description. Megan, you were recently in DRC, and I'd love you to tell everyone a little bit more about that trip and our work there.
Yeah, very much. So I was in DR Congo last month, only last month. It was a fantastic visit because amongst many other things, DR Congo is a very beautiful country and I got to see some fantastic landscapes. But of course that's not what Congo is known for. There's a massive history, long-standing history of conflict in not just the East, but also in fact the West. And I actually spent my time on a little-known crisis in the Maindombe province, which is only 2 hours drive from Kinshasa, the capital, but where interethnic conflict over land between two warring tribes has been simmering pretty much unrecognized across the world for the last 2 years, which for some time we have been trying to draw attention as tens of thousands of people have died and more families in particular have been displaced and are still being displaced by this conflict. So I spent some time, about 3 hours in traffic in Kinshasa actually, and then 2 hours actually getting to in the car through amazing landscapes to the Maindombe province, where we're implementing together again with a coalition of partners, not just local partners but also international organisations, to deliver a real multi-sectoral cross-cutting project. And I highlight that because whilst Street Child is very much a child-focused organisation, we recognise absolutely the holistic range of needs, the whole range of needs that every child, particularly in a conflict situation, has. But do we need to do it all? Of course we don't. We focus on education and protection. We're working with a number of partners on livelihoods, WASH, as well in that region. But what we have in that region is a sadly, we're a lone ranger, let's say. Our consortium is one of the only sets of organisations working in that area because Congo is absolutely beset by conflict in the east. A lot of the resources are drawn there, and so when something new springs up, unfortunately, in this and in our global context as well, the resources for such crises are limited. And yet, what's so frustrating about that conflict is, with some resources, with some mediation, with kind of timely peacekeeping, you see it as a real crossroads. You could see that conflict being resolved. And so it's been quite an interesting journey for me to observe our advocacy efforts, the work that we've been doing in Kinshasa to really highlight that crisis. And any of you who might have been following our social media lately will have seen a little bit more focus on the Maindombe crisis. not because it's yet another crisis, but because it's a crisis where we've got an opportunity to actually bring something to a resolution to really impact, to actually prevent further conflict in the region, because there are fears that what's happened in the east, in the Kivus and North and South Kivu, so it's basically a war economy now. The whole place runs on war and has for decades, and there's no need for that to be the case in Mandumbe, but unfortunately that's the direction of travel unless people are brought to the table, and in the meantime, of course, children are massively suffering there. So, fortunately, we have got the opportunity to deliver that project. We're 18 months in now, and we see some strong traction with USAID, actually, among others, new partners coming in and seeing what we've been able to achieve and actually wanting to invest in an expansion of what we're doing. But our hearts in DRC are never far from the east, and that is still the heartland of where we deliver in South and North Kivu. And last year was a huge year of implementation for us in both those regions, in partnership with the EU Humanitarian Fund and other partners, to work with children affected by the M23 crisis. That, again, if anyone follows geopolitics will really know how much the encroachment of M23 has further destabilised an already very unstable situation in North Kivu. And in fact, we were really at the vanguard of that, unfortunately, middle of last year, because when M23 came to take over a vast new territory in North Kivu, it was pretty much the last week of the project that we were delivering there. And very tragically, 2 of our partner staff, Tearfund, were killed in the retreat from the M23 controlled area in the midst of that conflict, really illustrating, the situation for our staff, not least for the communities, but even for our staff who are putting their lives on the line for the delivery of projects in some of the really toughest places in the world to be a child. So on the other hand, in DRC, I am also really excited about the opportunity to make a difference for children who are living in North Kivu and South Kivu in a crisis context with kind of little end in sight of the conflict, but still every hope for education. And so one of the things I'm most excited about in DRC for the coming year is actually teaching at the right level, which for those of you who are keenly listening to Julie's presentation in Somalia and Somaliland, there is an opportunity at the moment that we're talking with the government and with UNICEF about to actually do some very critical work on reading, writing and counting, those basic skills that every child, no matter what context they live in, should leave school with, and that includes in North Kivu and South Kivu. So the opportunity to actually do work on foundational learning in crisis contexts for children, to give them hope for the future, to invest in future generations, I think is something I really hope might take off next year, and I see as something that Street Child has been able to uniquely talk to and bring to the conversation with key partners in DR Congo. So DR Congo is the size of Western Europe. If it was to be a nationwide project, the big ambitions are on the table. And maybe I'll finish this section just by saying we've been talking a lot about the role Street Child plays as a mid-sized organisation. And I think there's been a real common thread in everything we've talked about in our ability to catalyse. We're not trying to be the massive everything. We're not trying to deliver everything, even in education and protection. We're trying to bring others together to catalyse change. And if that means 2 people in a room, or if it means a team of 10, it's still it's a catalytic effect for more children being safe in school and learning in the world's toughest places.
Great, Megan, thank you. Keep hold of the mic because I'm going to come back to you. But surely you're going to go to questions from the floor, so please, get your questions ready whilst I just invite Megan to share a little bit about the situation in Mozambique. I mean, one of the things that I love most about Street Child's work, off the back of what Megan was saying, is when we move in these conflicts, we move the children in these conflicts that frankly no one's heard of. And our work in Cameroon is one that always comes to mind in that respect, and our work in Mozambique is another, and that's over and above thinking about this recent disaster that hit pretty much a month ago, and many of you have swung to our aid, to our sort of resources to hand to the team there. Yeah, Megan, just a few words on that situation and what the team are doing to respond.
Yeah. To be a child in Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique is to have known like utter tragedy. It's awful. In 2019, you might be familiar, or may not even, but you probably would be aware that there were cyclones Kenneth and Idai, super cyclones, like category 5 cyclones that decimated large swathes of Mozambique. That's how we came, in fact, to enter Mozambique was in the aftermath of those cyclones. Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique was also affected. In 2020, COVID closed schools, as it did across the world, for more than 9 months in Mozambique. And then in around, I think, 2021 was when the insurgency, the extremist Islamist insurgency began in Cabo Delgado, and so communities were attacked. The insurgents in Cabo Delgado was specifically affected by the Islamist insurgency that massively destabilized the region, fighting over resources. Of course, the ideology, never very receptive to Western education either. And then 15th of December, this last year, 2024, another super cyclone within 5 years of Idai and Kenneth. And this time it flattened Cabo Delgado. Like Cabo Delgado was worse affected. And in particular, the district of Makufi is one that we work very closely in. We have been working in all through last year, all through the last 2 or 3 years actually, in collaboration with UNICEF, in response to the insurgency, trying to get schools back up and running, teachers trained in responding to the situation of conflict, huge displacement, massively overcrowded classrooms full of traumatized kids, and then, at Makufi, I don't think a roof was left. In tin shack communities, yes, but I mean, the strength of this cyclone was enormous. Anyway, so yeah, it's just really sobering. Now, of course, I see a lot of need and conflict, and we all do in the news, but just to think of being like a child in that district, I think is quite sobering. So the imperative for us to act was enormous, not just because of the enormous need, but we were there, and our partners were there. So we've been in a very privileged position in some ways to be able to act immediately and provide the relief assistance that's most predominantly been needed. So shelter is a massive need, tarpaulin to set up tents just for people to be able to have something over their head, non-food items, basic sanitary items for dignity. Of course, we'll be thinking into the future about rebuilding schools and getting children back in school, but yeah, Michael, our country lead in Mozambique, who I know has been in regular contact with all of us, but Tom was speaking to over Christmas, and is really, we are on the phone and in contact with Mozambique every day to understand more the shape of the needs and to be able to get the aid to where it's needed most. And so the appeal has been hugely appreciated and helpful in still being that first responder, much as all the work that we do on the systems level and the catalytic level is important. Of course, in places where we already are, we still are first and foremost humanitarians, and that's what's been happening in Mozambique.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Megan. And in the immediate aftermath of events like this, you do the frontline stuff, but I think it's distinctive of Street Child to really think about how we get children back in school as quickly as possible. The academic year begins in Mozambique in January. Yeah, literally every school in Makufi at least is definitely destroyed, and that will be a significant priority action in the coming months. I don't need to add on a sort of tricky note there.